We've been reading the 8 awakenings of great beings, the 8 realizations of grown-ups. The first 2 were to have few desires and to know how much is enough. The third, Dogen writes, the third awakening is to enjoy serenity. This is to be away from the crowds and stay alone in a quiet place. Thus it is called to enjoy serenity in seclusion. And before I read more, I want to be clear that Dogen is not necessarily speaking broadly here, nor was the Buddha when the Buddha gave the same teaching. When the Buddha looked for seclusion, he actually found seclusion. He went into a forest by himself. He did it when he was younger, and he did it at various times when he was older. He went to be completely alone. He left his family. He left everything that he had. Dogen spent almost his entire life, by most of our standards, in seclusion. It's not that there was no one else in the room, but it was a kind of quiet that some people today may never experience, and that most of us will only rarely touch. So Dogen and the Buddha are speaking very literally here. And they're speaking from a place that already to us may seem like serenity. And even from that place, they're saying, you have to be alone. You have to get quiet. For us, it's a little more complicated. Dogen writes, the Buddha said, monks, if you want to have the joy of serene non-doing, you should be away from crowds and stay alone in a quiet place. A still place is what Indra and other devas revere. By leaving behind your relations as well as others, and by living in a quiet place, you may remove the conditions of suffering. If you are attached to crowds, you will receive suffering, just like a tree that attracts a great many birds and gets killed by them. It's quite an image. If you are bound by worldly matters, you will drown in troubles, just like an old elephant who is stuck in a swamp and cannot get out of it. This is called to enjoy serenity in seclusion. So as with almost all of Dogen's teachings, he's speaking to monks. And part of what he's speaking to is the idea of the specific renunciation of the ordained path, to become a home leaver, to step away from your family relationships, from your worldly relationships, and step into something else. A monastic life, a secluded life, a quiet life, which is nice. But that isn't where this teaching stops. It isn't just that. That, for most people, is a fantasy. And more, even for monastics, it's a fantasy. I know a lot of monastics. I know a lot of monastics on social media. And what they're doing is they're constantly posting to social media. They're talking to people all the time. They aren't in seclusion. They aren't in stillness. They aren't in quiet. They have the same thing we do. Their phone is ringing. Their phone is buzzing. There's a red circle with a number in it that is calling them. There are ads, there are voices, there are pressures. The Buddha and Dogen could never have conceived of the noisy world we live in. My grandparents could not have conceived of the noisy world we live in. The one where something is always dinging. The one where work never stays at work. Because there's always that one more email you could reply to, and if you did, it would make work easier tomorrow. There's always one more box you can check now. My memories as a young boy are of my grandparents sitting on their back deck, on their lawn chairs, doing nothing at all, not even talking to each other, because why would they? They'd been together for 50 years. They were just looking at their lawn. How many of us are doing that? How many of us find that moment outside of maybe that one time a year going camping? And even then, how far away is the phone? And what are the voices in our heads? I always know in every quiet moment 10 things that I could be doing right now. And often that translates for me as 10 things I should be doing right now. At least one of them, maybe two of them. Dogen says if you leave behind your relations and you live in a quiet place, you may remove the conditions of suffering. So he's describing the conditions of suffering as the noise. And then he says, if you are attached to crowds, you will receive suffering just like a tree that attracts a great many birds and gets killed by them. And I love the image. I love how powerful this image is because it is devastating. And at the same time, it recognizes that the birds are not at fault. The noise of our lives is not a malevolent noise. Each individual voice, each individual message, each call, each request is not necessarily trying to harm you. It's not necessarily trying to pull you into suffering. But collectively, they create a set of conditions that we normalize so that we don't know what it is to be away from them. We don't know what it is to be silent. We don't know what it is to be still. As I've said with the previous two awakenings, this is not really deep stuff. It's not about some profound state of mind. Serenity here is not something that we aspire to and a few people maybe touch. That isn't it. With few desires and knowing enough is enough, the message is you explore it. You explore desire, you explore satisfaction, and the way that you do it is by taking things away. Here, there's a similar message, which is if you want to know what serenity is, you have to explore what it means to be alone. How do you be alone? Again, it isn't like it used to be. I went to India in my early 20s, and every day I thought, if I disappear today, no one will know. No one will know where I was today. I was not communicating with anyone. Sometimes I didn't know where I was. I wasn't alone, but I was alone. Now we can go our whole lives from beginning to end without knowing what it is to be alone. We have to choose it. We have to decide, I'm going to explore that. I'm going to look into that. And the only way to do it is to let something go. I don't think it means, as Dogen says, that you have to walk away from your family and your friends. It may mean that you have to put down your phone. It may mean that you have to go take a walk in the woods. It may mean that you have to go sit on your back deck and look at your lawn and not take anything with you. And sit with the discomfort of that. Because in that is serenity. Not a serenity that washes over you and feels so good, but a serenity that is always there if we notice it. The quiet is always there underneath the noise. The stillness is always there behind all of this motion. Always. So we choose to be alone. This is one that brings us back to Zazen. Not that Zazen is a panacea, it's not. But if you have decided that as part of your path, as part of your path of maturity, as part of your path of spiritual inquiry, that you want to know what it is to be alone, and yet you still live in this world, one of the best things that you can do is to sit down on a cushion and face a wall and breathe. Because when you do, you are alone. You can sit in a meditation center or a monastery with 200 other people, or you can sit in your garage by yourself. It doesn't matter. When it's just you and the wall and your breath, you're alone. And even there, of course, there is the noise. That's the discovery. All the thoughts and the questions and the fears, the concerns, the to-dos, they're there. And the serenity is there. And so if we don't have the forest to walk into, if we don't have that deck chair, we still have this wall, we still have this body and this posture and this breath. We can inhabit that and we can see the depth of what is there, the depth of that stillness, the depth of that silence. Again, not because it's great, not because you're supposed to feel a particular way, but because the rarity of it and the discomfort of it points to something we need to look at. Something we need to know. Maybe something we need to be able to eventually point someone else toward, knowing that they also might not find it by themselves. That's my simple understanding of what it is to explore serenity. I'll stop there.